romantic novels. Mark Twain said this of Sir Walter Scott. With the silliness and emptiness, sham grandeurs, sham gods, it's a real word, and sham chivalries of a brainless and worthless, long-vanished society, he did measureless harm, more real and lasting harm, perhaps, than any other individual that ever wrote. And I say that with all due respect. That's a Woody Allen line. It was Sir Walter that made every gentleman in the South a major, or a colonel, or a general, or a judge before the war. And it was he also that made these gentlemen value these bogus decorations. For it was he that created rank and caste. That's the key phrase that I found down there in the South, and also reverence for rank and caste and pride and pleasure in them. Enough is laid on slavery without following upon it these creations and contributions of Sir Walter. Sir Walter had so large a hand in making Southern character as it existed before. Remember, he lived during it, Queen did, before the war, that he is in great measure responsible for the war. It seems a little harsh toward a dead man to say that. We never should have had any war, but for Sir Walter, the Southerner of the American Revolution owned slaves, and so did the Southerner of the Civil War. But the former resembles the latter as an Englishman resembles a Frenchman. Pretty good way of putting it. You don't think of Englishman as foppish, you know what I mean? The change of character can be traced, this is very brilliant, can be traced rather more easily to Sir Walter Scott's influence than to that of any other thing or person. Not to think about. Pardon me? Okay, but you see this takes us one step further on our notion of identity. And here we are in ring tournaments, right? And I told a few of you this. So if you're a Washington, a bird, a bird, all these old guys, Fairfax and Danvers, you're here and you're Virginian forever, which is the title of today's show. And then you get word that as of November 1863, you're a Virginian. And all of this fantasy of being a Virginian, it just poof. It suddenly is kind of like just suddenly not yours. And any of us who've lived here any length of time, we are like a stepchild of West Virginia. Almost gonna be, oh my God. Oh no, we're not part of the same mix. They're still mad at us because we tried to get back into Virginia. That's all for today's story. But now that's the essential story, is how these Anglican royalists from southwestern England had this beautiful vision that they fulfill wonderfully, and then it's completely amped up by all the romantic novels of Sir Walter Scott. And then you're not a Virginian. This is spiritual death. And you go, Jim, you're exaggerating. Live here long enough. See, you know, Debbie, live here long enough. It's just, Charlestown is still grieving that. And there used to be little ladies after the Civil War that kept stubbornly putting Virginia. And, but that's part of when you consider Jefferson County by 2-to-1, 3-to-1 margin voted delegates to the Virginia secession to not secede. They picked the ones that to not secede by a 3-to-1 margin. The ones that wanted to secede were Charlestown people, 2 delegates. So here they are not even wanting it. And then they lose coming every way they turn, we lose. We lose the thing. The vote, I'm cutting to this because it's the whole heart of the tragedy. The vote that made us West Virginian was May 28th, 1863. And there's 2 voting places, Shepherdstown, Harpers Ferry. In Harpers Ferry, 1 person voted no. In Shepherdstown, 1 person voted no. I think 120 or something voted yes in Shepherdstown, and 38, that's all that voted. And that made us the state of West Virginia. Well, it was wartime, you know, yeah, you could, yeah, that's right, and they could get votes there. Charleston was still being contested. So, and you go, how could that possibly hold up? Well, who won? And it's good saying this all up front, but then we can go have fun. After the war, Andrew Hunter, who, as you're getting to figure out, the prosecutor in the John Brown trial, major force, is organizing, and your ancestor, Charles Faulkner, represented the other side, supporting the annexation. He was a moderate. But the point is, Andrew Hunter went to the Virginia legislature voted, yes, you can come back. And that's right about when Governor Borman, the first governor of West Virginia, is getting his troops ready to come. No, you're not. Trust me, I'll send troops. So there's a lot of anguish built into the identity, long-term identity of Charleston. Obviously, things are changing, but it's really quite a touching story, and kind of being tricked by one way or the other. The worst thing could happen is to take away Virginia from your identity. And, you know, I've said enough. I thought everybody loved Ivanhoe. Look at the crowd I was with. Okay, the DNA of our land. First, we have to do one thing. We started by saying the real central character underlying everything, literally, is the land. And so we're going to do a quick, get a little scientific with you, but don't worry, it won't hurt that. It only hurt briefly. I'm gonna give you a summary and show you the images. Let's talk about how is the soil here so incredible. One guy said it's the best soil in the colonies. And I can do it visually with sleight of hand. I love sleight of hand, whatever that is. Our soil is uncommonly good, particularly down around Cabletown, because about 250 million years ago, give or take 100 million years, we were this shallow sea all through the Ohio Valley, very shallow sun-drenched sea full of little doodads and buggers and everything, and crawdaddies and shellfish, crustaceans, who over hundreds of millions of years died and sunk and became the ocean sea floor. I mean, who knows how deep, thick those layers are after millions of years of great limestone, which is great for raising horses, by the way. See, all the pieces fit. Well, we still don't have our answer. But then I call it this great collision of continents. I think it's called the Pangea, something like that. But for millions of years on top of that, we have someone draw, you remember the Garrison Keillor, Momback, that's good. Well, continents were colliding for millions of years, and the Appalachian were as tall as Everest in the oldest days. And so what you see now is a sort of pitiful little remnant of them, but these collisions did something. If you're this limestone layer and it gets wanged, it goes, and limestone, when exposed to moisture, becomes dissolved and becomes soil eventually. So all that disruption of that limestone layer created a bunch of ridges, like Blue Ridge, right? And in between were these upland valleys, which is one we are. And you see, all for millions and millions of years, all that soil that covered the tops of the ridges washed down over and over again into the upland valley bowls into perfect soil. And if that's not good enough, I think it ended around 20,000 BC or something, but it was the Ice Age. Trust me, I had to look twice. This huge glacier came about as far as the Susquehanna, and I had to look again, 2 miles high. Yeah, so we have to, yeah, really, no, go look again. And so why am I even mentioning that? Everything that was a bird or some, life, kind of kept, nudging south, populating us and making it even more interesting, more diverse in terms of animals and in terms of, the birds would fly south and then they'd drop their poop and so on in our seeds, and that all those other vegetations from further north that got completely slowly obliterated, their birds like such would transfer those seeds and make it even more abundant here. So I did so much better than the slides. That's it. It's a real thing, and not many places have it. Hardly anywhere in West Virginia have it like Jefferson County, and I'll show you the map. Okay, let me show you how many things you didn't have to watch. Well, there they are. You're all gonna become a huge limestone layer. This is Life magazine, 1953, by the way. Thank you, Life. Here's the collisions, Mombat, and we're between the first and second fender. Yeah, the Blue Ridge is the second fender. Just as I'm describing, the mountains are creating because the soil, you can see this pattern of soil into the upland valley bowls. And now, see, look at the green. We're really not like the rest of the state. Green is karst, which is limestone, which is great for soil and great for raising horses. We're definitely the outlier. Even Berkeley doesn't have, we're 83% of karst, except from up in the mountain. Even Berkeley doesn't quite have the same. And then if you look at us with the Shenandoah Valley, it goes all, it's a strip, right? Like the Blue Ridge and the Alleghenies, this is in the Upland Valley Bowl. The only difference between us and all the others is that they have good soil, but we were near two big cities and could get to port with the C&O Canal and then with the B&O. So that's the difference. We could make money off the soil by growing the wheat and making this prime flour, which went to war-torn Europe. There you go. What do you do when a 2 mile high wall of ice is coming at you? It's not like you run, it takes a million years. Yeah, confirmation, 2 miles. And that's my explanation about all the flora and fauna. I love that phrase. Like, what the heck does that mean? All the flora and fauna was doubled and multiplied by the diversity. Okay. One of these writers, you're gonna laugh what he tells you. He's good. He's good. In traversing this mountain region, he's going to Barnesburg. One of the first things that struck me was the solemn, severe silence. We hungered for silence, which prevailed everywhere. Someone else called it noiselessness, and only broken at distant intervals by the note of the cock of the woods, the chirping of the ground squirrel, the crash of a falling tree, or the long echoes of the fowler's gun, which rendered the silence thus broken in upon for a moment still more striking. I must not forget to tell you that the only vestige of ancient chivalry I have seen in all of Virginia occurred in Martinsburg. So we live off in our little world and we read Sir Walter Scott and really kind of lose touch with reality. This is his words, not mine. I love this. I think it's 1816. The day being warm, we were sitting at the shady side of the hotel when a man rode furiously by on a horseback and swore he'd be damned if he could not lick any man who dares to crook his elbow at me. Instead of 10,000 fists leaping from the pockets of the 20 supine spectators, they affected to take no notice of it. And I'll tell you what, I'm deciding whether to play this to you, but it's really powerful. You can sit down in a tavern, you don't know who's next to you, and you start talking and you go, oh my God, right? This is what happened. I think I am going to share it because I've never forgotten it. The most powerful video I have done is called The Families of the Bower, Part 3. And this is what the guy said. You're talking to him, how's life? What do you do? Right, what's your job? I'm a lawyer, you know, I'm a traveler. What do you? Well, and then he starts explaining. He's Australian. Listen to me. He goes this, all along the road, I made it my business to inquire whether the man might perhaps be tempted to sell me his slides. And when I got some half a dozen of them, I tied my hands behind their backs and drove them 300 or 400 miles or more, bareheaded and half naked. I gave out that they were runaway slaves. I was carrying them home to the masters. On one occasion, a black woman exposed this fallacy and told the story of her being kidnapped. And when I got her in a wood out here, I bid her tell her that was what. Now you know what we're dealing with. And this is so powerful. I'm switching gears radically. He also said, following that in the diary, you almost want to balance it. This is James Kirkpatrick. I've never heard anyone say this. It is seldom we see the ties of kindred conjugal affection stronger than in the poor Negro. He will travel 12, 15, or 20 miles to see his wife and children. And if she's at another plantation, you have no idea. One day she could be gone, you know. To see his wife and children after his daily labor is over, and return in the morning to his labor again. Why do you think the NFL is full of really strong black guys? There's some DNA going on. Okay. He will often, I love this, if he obtains his liberty, he will often devote the first years of his liberty to buying their freedom, thus setting the example of conjugal and parental affection which the white man may indeed admire, but it is feared would seldom imitate. When this was republished a few years later, it wasn't in there. You know, he's had a political career, he didn't want to touch on it. But don't you love seeing that? Those are hard to find. I love this. He doesn't look black, does he? That's a mulatto. That's pretty funny. He's a mulatto. But this is one of the greatest odd stories. Do you know, anyone know about James Roper? In 1850, I went to the census and I read all of how much the value of each person's real estate. He's a mulatto. His real estate was worth the most in the whole county. Had three or four farms. That's what's so wonderfully weird about Jefferson County. And dynamics. He's a son of Nicholas Roper, and courtesy of what does it say? A deed of man. Okay. Nicholas, this is the 1793, a deed of manumission from Nicholas Roper to Mr. James Roper, acknowledged by said Roper, and so on. The family kind of skirts around a little bit. It looks like a woman who was enslaved in black named Mary Horn was mother. And he very judiciously had her buried in the Roper family cemetery in England. So he knew how to kind of do the game. But James Roper, in future years, was a very successful farmer. And Russell Roper, he was adopted into the family. He's someone from our age. He died recently. But Ropers are, and the Ropers in Charlestown have a white line and a black line, which is really, once again, really kind of wild. But this is not talked about. It's fascinating to own that many, and he also got out through the Civil War and didn't lose any of them. You know, it's fascinating. This would be unimaginable in South Carolina. The way if you saw the video, you're set. I can't top it. That's one of my best videos. I can't say that about the carriage in video, it kind of goes on and on at the end. But that is I can't beat how well that's done. And just, there's the reiteration of the 500 million, Loudon and Jefferson with all their land, all their wheat. See, 517 bushels of wheat. 517 bushels of wheat. You're not gonna find anybody even close to that. Every year, 1 million acres of wheat that went to Europe, and that, not only did that grow wheat. Side comment, I bet all of you've seen this before. This is a very famous video, and it was by Winslow Homer. I mean, it's a painting, it's at the National Gallery, by Winslow Homer. And he's a union guy. Do you know what I love the name of it? What the name of it is? A veteran working in a new field. I didn't know painters could have a sense of puns. And this is where we're going. A little more James Kirk. The harvest commenced, this could very well have been the Bower, The harvest commenced when I was here, and you would have been astonished to see what work they made with a field of wheat, containing, I was told, upwards of 500 acres. All hands turned out, and by night it was in shocks. I'm in shock. An army of locusts could not have swept it away half so soon had it been green. I happened to be riding through the fields at 12 o'clock and saw the women coming out, singing, gallantly bonneted, this is the family, with large trays containing ham and cornbread, a food they prefer to all other. And so you see, the notion that the lie to this whole thing is that they're supposed to be kind of servile and incapable of anything. Well, we know what the truth is. This is in the video. Then they make bundles. And I checked this out. They really would take straw and kind of thread them together and then make a string out of it. This was 1859, just before the John Brown raid. And they dry the sheet. This is how it looks. The dry sheaves are taken. And so that's the end of the wheat. The wheat grows also houses. The money built all the houses. Claymont today, Blakely today, Cedar Lawn today. Historically, that's pretty, the footprint's the same. This was added, this is where they're adding porticos to conform to a certain idea. This is really the classic portico. This is pre-Civil War. If you go around the county, this kind of portico makes it kind of pre-Civil War. This got built in 1830. And this is the Bower. The Bower is a story and a half in Hazelfield. The most interesting thing is 4 of these copied the person here with a new architectural idea that, Johnny Allen, great book on architecture. He says this particular feature in these houses you could not find anywhere else except a little place in North Carolina. So, but we have our own little way of doing everything. Keep in mind the hermetic nature of the county. It's got everything, grow all the food they need. They've got everything they need in the county, and it's sort of a high quality subsistence environment other than wheat. But it had everything it needed, stayed unto itself in a funny way. I see you nodding yes, you know what I mean. Okay, but what's interesting is this is a Hazelfield. And I have a feeling that he might have been the guy who got this idea. He's another heavy hitter type of guy. He's a lawyer and very Virginian and all that. The rare transverse hallway, another must-have of prominent families. What they mean is, let's see if there's a better image. When you come in the main entrance, okay, you're coming in the front door here. This is the Hazelfield. There's a wing. You notice the wing is part of it, but there's 2 doors, two rooms, right, left. the men would go here, the women would go here after dinner kind of thing, with a removable partition. But you walk in the door and there's a transverse hallway. The old one, just you walk in the door and then all we go straight out to the back door. It's a little couple of rooms. So that was you had to make that a part of your house. After 1820, you had to, or else you weren't cool. I'm joking, but they all just ran for it, yeah.
I'm sorry, this
Please.
really doesn't have anything to do with this. I just.
Please,
Question that.
questions, I love it.
That hit me, because we used to own the Thomas Shepherd Inn, right? And,
Oh, you used to go, okay.
yeah, so when you first go into the hallway, which was not a transverse hallway, you went to the back.
Yeah.
But the first two doors
Mhm.
were extremely wide,
Oh,
going to the two side rooms, and I know it used to be a rectory for the church,
mhm.
and originally. And I was wondering if that was either for women with hoops or for funerals to carry caskets.
That's
Do
a
you have
great
any
idea.
idea?
No, look, they used to call it the parlor.
Yeah,
And so that's where all the funerals were, those were at home.
yeah, but as part of the church, they would have maybe had more.
Of course.
So I didn't know if you knew if that was true or what. I assume those were the possibilities, but I never knew.
And if you really look closely at Johnny Allen's book, every town has its own specific craftspeople, and like there was a James Shepherd, but they had their own people and they had kind of their own patterns. These were just the big ones, the big houses, and they almost all were kind of weirdly related to each other, except for the Bower. Okay, folks, the Bower is a story on itself. That's next. That's a drawing of a man by David Hunter Strother in this book that I've been going over and over in my head about J.P. Kennedy, John Pendleton Kennedy. This is a really, really interesting person. Swallow Barn advanced the same creed that Sir Walter Scott novels did, but it Americanized it. It has the reputation, it sold fantastically well in 1832 in the South. It was like How to Be a Southerner. And it's officially known in all of the literary world, it is the most realistic, not most realistic, but of the books that are called the plantation literary tradition. It was the first one, and everyone started copying because he made so much money. And then it all went completely bananas at the very end in something known as Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind was when the hyperbole just blew everything up, and it was taken to a purple level. But they needed that to stroke and massage this image of you gotta be honored with all these slaves. I mean, you had to really mix that up right, but it was powerful because I actually like John Kennedy, and here's why. He's from Baltimore. He's like classic mid-Atlantic, a little north, a little south. He was against slavery. He was president of the B&O Railroad. He's the one that made sure B&O dipped into our county. But what's most interesting, he found a guy in the gutter, drunk, filthy. Hey, you need something? What's your name? Poe. And got him Poe. He took him home for dinner. And he said, you can come to my table anytime. Gave him some money, kept doing it. And he found him a job at a literary magazine in Richmond. Oh, he saved his life. He's known as Poe's patron. So, but this great mystery here, I almost can't quite grasp how important this was. A Sojourn in the Old Dominion, a novel by John Pendleton Kennedy. And I'm pretty sure that this was a barn That's probably the Bower today up on the hill. I spent many hours there. I know the family, and that's probably the real barn. Charlotte probably drew it from reality. Want to know a little more? This is good. I'll have to do it. Historians love to call it a novel, but this is what happens. He's a little deceived about one thing. He paints a positive picture of the Bower. He had 69 slaves. But he's never there in the fall. He's there in the summer with his mother. And he's there, you know, through the harvest, and then he goes home. That's all he knows. But it's in the fall that they had, in 20 years, they had 4 auctions of 80 people each. And that's what I think he honestly didn't know that. They you know, they wait till everyone's gone as winter. And how do you do that? How do you have such a problem? The family originated with Adam Stephen, who had 5,000 acres in the county. And he died, and his son, Adam Stephen Dandridge was his grandson. And the long and short is, when he dies, he had four children, 4 or 5 children. They all got a big chunk of land. This is where the sales start. I don't want mine. I'm a doctor. I'm going to Cincinnati. I don't believe in slavery. I'm going, sell it. I married a guy in Richmond. He already has the land. I'm moving to Richmond to sell it. And this guy over here at Elmwood on the Peckin, I don't know. I'm not doing a writing job. I don't know how to do it. Whatever, sell it. And then up near Carnesville, where Rockwell is, there was a farm run by Philip Dandridge, who just screwed up, kept getting in debt. And so suddenly they found out that he would sell slaves to pay off the debts who they were not supposed to sell. It all came and landed in the lap of Adam Stephen Dandridge II. And he stuck to it right up to the 1870s. But that's how you end up with 80 slaves, 4 slave auctions of 80 people. That's the tragedy. Okay. I think we'll leave it at that. There's too much there. This man says, the Southern Plantation sees John Kennedy's Fall of Barn as the beginning of the plantation novel tradition, and at the same time, the first Virginian novel. Okay, we talked about silence, right? Silence. Oh yeah, what silence? Teach me a class on silence. I don't get silence. You know, when kids grew up here, they could listen. Can you do this? Can you hear the wind blow through the trees in the fall and know which type of tree it is, whether it's oak or not? Everybody could. The bucolic quiet life, punctuated by an occasional church bell or a brief but sharp rendition of thunder and lightning, was brutally introduced to a screeching, fire-belching, banshee creature that came to stay, shattering the peaceful forevermore. The Winchester Potomac Railroad and that connected to the Baltimore, Ohio Road and Harper's Ferry. And the 1830s saw not only happy royalists in their chic big mansions and prosperity for all, but the railroad connecting Charlestown to Baltimore. Baltimore's port made the wheat boom even louder. Okay, this is clearly did not seamlessly move from the last slide, but this is one of these people who goes, she is really cool. I mean, these men were supposed to be very sober. This is Wendell Holmes, right? Every emotion was instant. Health and intelligence, her head and features were cast in a noble mode, and her form, which at rest had something of a missive majesty of a marble pillar. In motion was instinct alike with power and grace. I think you like her. Harriet, yeah, I wish I got a little like that. She said, Harriet Lane Buchanan Johnston was the official consort of James Buchanan. He was ambassador to England and court of St. James in the 1850s for about 4 years. And Queen Victoria got along great with young Harry, like a kid's sister. And that had huge implications for us when Victoria declared the Neutrality Act. Those things come back. And when Buchanan became president, she was his White House hostess. And that's where you get all this railing. And she had like 4 uncles and 5 cousins who lived in Shepherd, Charlestown. So she only came here for a temporary education as a little girl, but they were the new power nexus. They were Pennsylvanians. But that's why we have to mention her. And she's a heck of a great story. Harry Rebecca Lane Johnson, May 9th, 1903, the original first lady. And all the previous women, like Dolly Madison, you can Google, they all had other strange they hadn't settled on something yet. And this photograph of Harriet Lane became a beautiful engraving in Leslie's Weekly. And the caption said, the original first lady, and then it's history. Do you think the Lanes had some clout in Charlestown? That's all the land they own. That's just some of it. Boom, boom, boom. This is all developed. This is Samuel Street, all the fancy houses. This is all owned by Rebecca Hunt. And this, they had an over here, it's ridiculous. So now you know the new, and they're related to Andrew Hunter, who we already know is a heavy person. So you see, the Washingtons are now Jane Charlotte Blackburn Washington, and her husband John Augustine Washington, Bill Blakely, and in 1830 they moved there, and he inherited Mount Vernon from Bushwood, Washington. And then he died within 2 years. These men always died. And Jane Charlotte owns Mount Vernon until the 1850s. And she transports probably 24, we have their names and ages, from Blakely, who then worked at Mount Vernon. There's a lot of research to do there. She was the first person, so my point is she had to deal with everybody coming, saying, my congressman said I should come. And would you like to have dinner? Over and over again. And it was falling apart. So they were very, very preoccupied with saving Mount Vernon, not quite as interested in what's going on here, at least in the case of that part of the family. This is just a side comment. This is David Hunter Strawberries from Martinsburg. He knew how to draw. One of my great benefits in making these videos is I have all of these drawings that are accurate of people of this period in time and place. But this one says it all, doesn't it? Called the slave driver. And I'll just simply say this: Davy Hunter was the overseer at the Bower in the 1850s. And this is a perfect example of Adam Stephen Dandridge kind of sitting on the front porch, having a julep, sort of after the morning julep. This is the noonday julep. And he's just there, and that's what could happen. You just sat there and, didn't have to touch dollar, you didn't like touching money, you weren't a merchant. He was living the dream. But the guy who they saw was Davy Hunter. And he didn't have I put this together. He had come from, remember I mentioned the farm that was owned by Philip Dandridge, he was messing it up. Well, he was the overseer there. So that didn't bode well. Only to say, according to Bertha Fox Jones, who descended from four brothers, 5 people who were named Fox, who were raised as slaves at Bower. She told me this. She said, I almost feel trying to give her voice. She said, well, the slaves kept coming over from Africa and they died. It wasn't working. So they decided to have them come over here and and have them born here. You know, she said it in a more great way, but then she said, all I remember, her Dewey Fox was 100 years old. He told her this, and he said John Fox told her this. John Fox became very successful at 4 farms. He said, all we remember is her mother was Mary. Their mother was Mary. And the last thing they ever saw from her was, oh, she said, now Mary told the master that she wasn't gonna be a rude woman. And you know what she said that next? Well, you don't tell your master what you're not gonna do. And the last we saw of her, according to John Fox, was she was on the back of a wagon with 1 horse and it was beaten. And you know, look at me. When I turned off the tape and I said, well, what happened to her? She looked at me like I was a fool. They killed her. Okay, whatever. And so that's why I mentioned Davy Hunter. He was there, and there was a woman who was her mother, named Dennis. Her last name was Dennis, who had been secretly keeping these kids counted for, but not on the records. And so it's a powerful story, I gotta say it. So as Bertha says it, they went up to the main house and they said, there's some foxes in the back there, some foxes back there. And the mistress of the house thought they meant foxes. No, it was John, Benjamin, Anthony, Humphrey, and Mary. Oh, and they decided just to let him, they brought him into the main house. And, you know, you can imagine the mistress probably didn't like that, but she said, this is interesting. And they feed them, and they had to have the milk out of the same bowl with the cats and dogs. Now you're just like me. I go, oh my God, that's terrible. Just no. They learned how to read. They learned how to write. See, that's what I love. It's throwing all this judgment. No, they learned how to read. So that's the story, and every one of them did very well. That's the end of that story. That's one of the most powerful things. This is the image of nighttime around the bonfire where they just talk, they dance, they put a big, they could have their own little gardens. And yet, you know, they could kill a hog and do it. They could do that. There's leeway. And you do all your community life there, and because no overseer is going to wake up and bother you. That's a wonderful depiction of it. That's from a painting by, I think it's Winslow Homer's famous painting about the carnival. Everyone's dressed up like circus clowns. Fabulous painting. You know about him? Much to your surprise, I'm just gonna let that rest, okay? Because you do all know about the general story. And I'll, because I'll hear this. You didn't know, after the raid, every one of these had a suspicious fire or theft or poisoning. Only between the raid and the hanging, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And my sources are like the New York Times. And I have more detail on it, but these are all had cases of burnings and poisonings. Okay. Here's the trial room. You see all the guys who are hanged. They all hanged 3 different times at Hunter's Field, Rebecca Hunter's Field. 7 raiders are tried and convicted of treason, murder, and insurrection in a perfunctory trial, and then hanged. And these were crimes against the state of Virginia. People forget that. On top of that, there's column number 7 that says illegally outside the state of Virginia. Escape. 589 escaped. At least that's what was recorded the following summer in August in the census. Another overlooked fact. If I'm enslaved, I can see my master is so really thinking about sending me south so he doesn't lose me. So I think I'm gonna send myself north. Unfortunately, this is not ever said. The election. Oh, Lincoln didn't get nary a vote in Jefferson County. I said, the Senator John Breckinridge, Louise Breckinridge lives in Shepherdstown today. 458, Douglas was sort of, was not for secession, but he was, these two split each other. People forget, John Bell, this whole thing was, I don't want to secede. Because you know what, he's right, the Constitution protects slavery. He's right. It just doesn't protect expanding slavery into new territories. And he won by, this is interesting, he won by a huge amount in Jefferson County. But by a little bit in the state of Virginia. But you see where his sentiments are. If you're still, remember we're talking about the difference between Charlestown, environs, and the rest of the county? Just look, observe if you will. He's in Cabletown, Harper's Ferry. These are not Charlestown. 1430, a maximum of 1,433 voted for this ticket. William Lucas, remember he was the guy with the James Taylor and William Payne, and Andrew Hunter. That's all they got. So once again, we do not want to go. We do not want to secede. So we get it coming and going. Then you go there. Everything. This is about the secession. This is the long debate that they had on and on. And suddenly, when there was a provocation at Fort Sumter, which prompted Lincoln to send, a Navy there, that caused a shift in the vote in the secession convention. The ones who didn't want us to see controlled it over and over and over and over again until this provocation. And then it passed 88 to 55. People from the western counties were leaving, rushing out of the hotel room while men had rope to hang them. It was just a pure coercion. It was a fear thing. More clouds. And this is when a lot of guys from the Charlestown area, marches militia down to Harper's Ferry. They were going to capture it. Hardly before the ink was dry on the secession vote. They were going to do it ahead of, it wasn't, and they were skipping over the fact that it was not official, this secession, until May 23rd, the following month, because there was going to be a referendum confirming it. So they're just going ahead anyway. We're just going to take it anyway. We're going to capture the arsenal. And all of a sudden, boom, 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 because the lieutenant that was in charge of protecting it, blew it up. Oh. Drawing by David Hunter Strother, which is very poignant, taking down the flag at Harper's Ferry. He married, his wife was very much a part of that Hunter family in Charlestown, so they really didn't like him. Will there ever be one to write the life of the common soldier? Deeds of valor are no longer dreams gone by. We live, oh no, she said it, we live in nightly days. Oh God, here we go. Our men of dauntless. A good Irishman, William McCarter, he was firing artillery at Charlestown. And a tragic, very moving, where he found, after walking through the town, people going into one house, and there was a blanket over a little girl on the piano. Then he found out what his artillery shells were doing. And like a real Irishman, he really loaded up, really shared his feelings. Painters of the rarest talents may one day paint the destruction in masterly styles and glowing colors. This is a little spoof. These are all the guys trying to enlist. And they're like, you gotta do it. The girls won't like you if you don't. This is the ultimate practitioner of what Mark Twain calls the Sir Walter Scott disease. This is Turner actually, he's living the dream. And I think one of the funniest things is when Charlotte was talking about how the Northerners think that these lazy guys with immense tulips don't have any hunting or fighting skills. They call them a feat. He says, they haven't come in contact with some hardy southern, we know these guys, you know. They haven't come in contact with some hardy southern mountaineer carrying a 150-pound buck on his shoulder. Some stark and sinewy swamper with a swivel of a ducking gun, some hard-riding Tony Lumpkin of the rural gentry, pro chevalier of the tournaments, the cockfights, and quarter-minute water races. He would presently find out who was a thief. These guys would come out of the woods and they describe him as half horse, half alligator. Here it is. Yeah, you got that. Here they are. This is one of my favorite photos of these are prisoners of war. But doesn't that embody the whole thing? This guy here, it's like, so I'm captured, so what? You want to fight about it? That's just to give you a glance at all the skirmishes and fights in the county. And that is not for the entirety of it. This is only from about the last year and a half. So these are cavalry, go back and forth. Lots of things around Charlestown, but the main thing I want to say is Charlestown more or less had a lot of, not a lot of deaths and on-site fighting had. It was more like, you know, these guys gallop into town and they see the other guys and they turn around, they gallop out and they come galloping into town. It's sort of like after you going back and forth and back and forth. So there are only two that are really talking. Doesn't need much elaboration, but I did a couple of videos about Amherst, R.H. Ranson, and Dick. This was throughout the entire war. And he was very good on the black market. He did all kinds of stuff. But they stayed together through the whole war. That's about where the rebel yell first got yelled. This guy's arguing the first time the rebel yell was yelled, and he lived down on Ann Lewis Road. Was when they were going to Manassas in July of '61, and they're all yelling and screaming, "We're gonna flag, yay!" And then right after they got that announcement, they started this, you know, Yahoo thing, all the way from Winchester to Shenandoah. And he said, I never heard. He's got a good argument. This is before the first major battle, you know. But who's to say? We have time. Anybody have time?
4 o'clock, almost 4 o'clock.
You got about an hour, or a half hour, 35 minutes.
Wait, what?
35 minutes?
Okay. What I'm gonna do is move this forward. I'm gonna go another 10 minutes and then we're just gonna, how are you doing?
Good.
Okay. I think this doesn't need to be elaborated, but they always had problems. They always had, Stewart came by with Max Sweeney to play with his banjo in here and look at old cards of the seat. Jackson came by and returned a flag that they gave him to bring to Manassas because he had an official flag and with a thank you note. Obviously not the same day that General Francis Banks had dinner with them, who's the head of 30,000 men on the Union side in February '62. Obviously, above all, when Grant meets Sheridan in this room here, the long and short of it is they were at a point in time where he took over the command August 6, 1864. Early had just burned most of Chambersburg. An election is coming up. And the whole thing with Lincoln says we have to get, Early must be driven out of this region or else I won't get elected. They talk about Sherman, but no, this is going to directly affect, if you're burning the homes of voters in Pennsylvania. And so Sheridan comes in and if you've never heard the quote, Grant is trying to tell him what he has to do. You have to burn every barn with wheat in it. Don't bother widows, don't bother orphans, don't bother Don't ever burn a home after what happened. But every filled mill, every filled barn, every mill, livestock, and fences, take everything. Just zoom right through. They started down, well, what Grant tried to say is, Phil, what I'm trying to say is, so, anybody who's living in that area, no, a crow flying over the Shenandoah Valley has to carry its own provender, because there's no food. This is as blank as you can get. And what did he do? He started down in Staunton and worked his way up 70 miles, 30 miles wide, to just below where the B&O Railroad track is. They didn't go southern half of our county. September 26th to October 7th, 13 days. They took 2,000, they burned 2,000 barns filled with hay, 70 mills, 4,000 hogs, no, 3,000 sheep, or 4,000 livestock. It got so that when they were still fighting with Early, at Fort Fisher, they were just so, they were starving. They surrendered because they were starving. This is not too important. These are a bunch of Union guys in Charlestown. This is bouncing around. These are a bunch of Union guys in Charlestown, you know, in 1861, talking about bathing and everything and all that. This is just like fluffy stuff. There's the flag. I'm gonna get past all of that. Banks brought his whole army in here in early 62, which is when we really started seeing how big an army it was. They sang the John Brown's song as much as they possibly could. I'll leave it at this. The two things that happened that were really damaging was May 28th, there was some inexperienced Union guys had a battery over where the racetrack is, and they rushed into town. They set on fire things. They just did it. And David Hunter Strongman did his best to organize a bucket brigade. They saved. There was a beautiful house building in where the Washington market is. That was burned down, and the train station was burned down, and then they were driven out. This was burned down, and that's what was left. That was what was in this place. I feel like some strong. What time do we got? There's the courthouse after the man you just saw was Immonen. This is Benjamin Simpson. It was his men were all holed up in the Maryland. It was the Maryland unit. Were all holed up in the courthouse, and Immonen said, "I'm going to shell the town if you don't surrender immediately." And what he ended up doing was blowing up destroying the roof of the courthouse and the first floor. So there was it was just a shell. This is when Andrew Hunter's home was burned down, 1864 by David Hunter. That was right next to where the racetrack is. And then he went and burned the two homes in Shepherdstown. Oh my goodness. "I want to leave them only with their eyes with which to weep," he said. This man carried a secret from a Quaker woman in Winchester. That's sure really needed to have. We'll wind it up after this. It told him that Early does not have the number of men that he thought he did, because Kershaw was being sent south to help Lee. And a Quaker woman got wind of that, and she wrote it down and put it in a little piece of tin foil that Mr. Laws, who could go to Marketplace in Winchester, hid and brought it to Sheridan. He meets Grant. Grant can understand when Sheridan's suddenly really ready to fight. And that's why. That's the carriage in. We're gonna see that. Oh, I think we're gonna wind up right here. Here it is. This is the real table that they met on. The family gave me that. And also a man named Benjamin Smith's leg was amputated on it. So Ian Rutherford Cross loves to bring it up when he has guests for dinner. And there's that. This is what it looked like. What time do we have? 15 minutes?
Oh, you got almost a half hour.
Is that right? You can almost guess what that caption is. This is from the James E. Taylor sketchbook, he was accompanying, in 1864, Sheridan's Army. I wonder what song they're spontaneously singing out in front of the courthouse. Happens every time, every time. Remember, the title of this class is Forever Virginians. 1865, keeping chronological, I think we're doing pretty well. Wow. 1865, February 24th. This is the story people love to get all worked up about. You know, it's that heroism thing. Jefferson County native John Yates Bell was executed at Governor's Island, New York, for being a Confederate privateer. Many people just say he's a Confederate spy. Well, he was a privateer who tried and failed to free Confederate officers on Johnson Island on Lake Erie. He was a spy, and for planning to take over a train at Niagara Falls Station. Lincoln, this is true, he often pardoned people, Confederate soldiers, but he did not oppose the military tribunal's decision, and he wrote, "The case of Bell on the lakes had to be an example." John Yates Bell lived right off all that land on Country Club Road. All of that he inherited twice from his father and grandfather. That included a castle in England. And he's sort of like, it's like poor little rich boy thing. How interesting it is that on the week of the hanging of the John Brown raid, I think we mentioned this before, he must have met John Wilkes Booth when Wilkes Booth wanted to give a reading of Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, in the Episcopal reading room. Of course, Bell was on the vestry. It's easy to see them having that meeting for the purpose. And some have written that when he got wind of Bell being hanged, that was one of many things that prompted him to shoot Lincoln. The main was getting black citizenship. Now, Henry Benjamin Lewis went on to be the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court. He's a hunchback. He had tuberculosis of the spine. And so he knew him since boyhood. He always was the one that sat on the bank while John Yates Bell and Evan Grady were splashing in the river, but he was always a friend. He tried to go and get to New York and be a lawyer for him. This is like a military tribunal, you know, hey. And he was hanged. And just as he was about to get launched skyward, because that's the kind of gallows it was, he said this whole thing that I die for my country. He thinks that's Virginia. This is murder. I have nothing more to say. And then the reporter who said I was the only one closer to him than me was the executioner. And just in a voice, he said, do not be afraid, Alice, for I am coming. And that reporter said, for the rest of my life, I've been haunted by that. So you imagine the fury that Benninger feels. He writes, scribbles it down in this mood, the war's ending and his friend, and and he writes the land where we are dreaming, which is like the quintessential lost Southern cause poem. And I won't go through all of it because I must say it's sort of angry with the death of his lifelong friend, the Civil War and its outcome. Lucas wrote a poem entitled The Land Where We're Dreaming. The last two stanzas. Remember I said this is about forever Virginians. And are they really dead? Are martyrs slain? No. Dreamers, morn shall bid them rise again from every plain and from every height on which they seem to die for right. Their gallant spirits shall renew the fight in the land we are dreaming. this is with the war ending, by the way. Unconquered, still unsold, though now overrun in peace and war, the battle's just begun. Once this, I can't pronounce it, Thystean banquet, or grown strong, the few who bide their hour shall rise and hurl its drunken guests from power in the land where we were free. That kind of got aged. That didn't age out very well. John Trowbridge. This is an unknown young veteran. One of my favorite stories. I think some of you know him. But Trowbridge is checking out Charlestown, and he said that at the hotel they had. I know some of you know this. We had treason for breakfast, treason for lunch, treason for dinner, and the women were worse than the men. You know, and well, there a lot. Everything it's their stuff that's destroyed is the domestic scene. And then he said, one guy told him, listen, Charlestown is like a burning bush with a big wet blanket wrapped around it. It's just seething. This is the scene. When you're reading, it creeps up on you. He sees a young, he talks about this very handsome and beautiful class of people walking around. And he sees this guy sitting alone, and he goes over to him and he tries to chat him up. And he said, I couldn't tell what it was. He was very polite, but every word was measured, and every word felt like a fired bullet, but very polite. And this kind of Trowbridge, he's got an empty sleeve for an arm. Didn't you notice? And then finally, Trowbridge wakes up and he gets, I'm sorry, I wish you well. And he said, the young man suddenly just really wanted to talk, you know, because he finally realized that Trowbridge saw who he was and what he went through. What we're doing so well is making me dizzy. You know how much they were holding on to be in Virginia? She was married into the Dandridge Kennedy clan, lived in Charlestown. Her husband was a lawyer. And she writes this incredible 2-volume thing called The Selvins of Virginia and Allied Families. It is the most complete genealogical account of almost every family I can think of who were old Virginian. Talk about hanging on to Virginia. It's touching. My favorite. Gosh, Megan is crazy. I knew her. She was 92 years old when I knew her. And she said, well, how old are you? 45. Just, oh God, that's so long ago. And she told me this great story. William McDonald, some of you know this. How many of you know this story? Okay. William McDonald was the real deal. He did not own slaves, but he did that. I'm fighting for my state, for Virginia. McDonald's and Benningers are the two most interesting families in Jefferson County. And okay, we have to talk about that. We need to add. And Julia, she's like 6 foot. Great. I love her. She was so cool. She's about to go away to this little Quaker school in Philadelphia, right, for a boarding school. And he sits her down and he says, Julia, you're going away north. I need to talk to you. I never owned slaves, but I fought for my state. I fought for those I knew. I fought for those I loved. But thank God we didn't win. Mm-hmm. And Julia said, so it just took the whole thing off the top of my head there. She saved her from having to be the apologist for the rest of her life. Now, full circle, I'm really proud of myself. Are we gonna get this by 4:30?
Mm-hmm. You have like 2 more minutes until you want to do your question.
Okay, good grief. See, he grew up in Charlestown and he's gonna be in our next class. So we listened to him because he grew up marinating in all of that chivalric stuff. But he went north and became an editor of Vanity Fair New York. So with that New York sophistication, went to Princeton, he had another point of view. But he said, I still loved it. I still love Charleston. Just when the Southerners, this is what he wrote. Just when the Southerners first began to find ancestors among the adherents of the Stuarts, I do not know, but I suspect that Sir Walter Scott put them on that trace. We're making a case here. Scott was enormously read throughout the South, and he undoubtedly made more conscious a romantic disposition that was already there. For if the Cavaliers were not ancestors, they could at least be seen as antecedents. Call it a myth. Grandfather's parentage was Scot-Irish, and grandmother could name only a Jacobite great-grandfather who had come scurrying from the Battle of Culloden. But they were not, if you will, very much like pretty nobles who rode Prince Rupert. There still remains that assumption of charm, that very real desire to please. Think of Jeff Stewart, a high-heartedness with hope, a recklessness against all odds. And yet, it is to be wondered whether they ever made for anything more telling than an admirable failure. Even at Roncevaux, that's where Prince Rupert tried his best and didn't win. And this ties it all together. There's John Peel, there he is. You know, and that's Ginny. I could go on indefinitely about Charlestown, my birthplace. The town which sat for the Mornington of the stories, this series called Many Thousands Gone. And though it had its ridiculous side, as I meant to suggest, if only one of his short stories, I can't help but think it's better to have been raised in a place where the inhabitants flaunted a fantastic pride. And in one place of the barren towns of the Middle West, whose timeless existence seems invariably remembered with horror and by those who have escaped. So that's a perfect Charlestown perspective. I think that's all. Oh, it really is, isn't it? We're done. Questions? So it took me longer to make it than for you to enjoy it.
I must say, the table at the carriage house, the dining room table,
Yes.
looks amazingly good for having had an amputation done on it. I want
Yeah.
to see the saw.
Yeah, I know. Good point, good point. Yeah, I know this. I'm laughing, but they have a good, I had to kind of coax that out of them, by the way. So what do you think? Abby, you see, isn't it interesting how much the evidence piles up about this pattern of the chivalry myth? And I didn't elaborate how fully John Pendleton Kennedy built on that. And then do you understand that if you're completely raised in that, and then suddenly you're in West Virginia? Wow. Still not over. They don't want to tell you, but if you go to Harewood, go around the corner, there's this wonderful old painting of Robert E. Lee worn out, sitting beside his horse. How you doing? How we doing? You have no questions at all. Does it change your perspective of Charlestown? Does it feel right? I never knew all that on and on and on. And where did that come from? I started to figure that out. Because you're doing slaves, you know? Slavery around here, if a private citizen did something really cruel, the community would rally against him, which I'm glad I've seen that. And that's what ARA transit. But that systematic thing just kept rolling.
But like you said, Jim, it all sort of goes back to that whole landed gentry thing that came from England. And look who we had around here.
Even
All the
today.
Tidewater nobility coming up here, the Washingtons, and yeah.
Yeah, and they just put their stamp on it. And you know, you see, I'm so glad that Mark Twain said cast. That was permanent damage. Yeah.
What was the real difference that Virginians saw in now becoming West Virginians? Why was it so significant to them, really?
I mean, why they didn't like it?
Yeah, what did they see as being
It's just
such a
a
difference?
whole other bunch of people. They're Scott Presbyterians, there isn't an elite class unless you're coal barons.
It really goes back to colonial days, doesn't it? The
Yeah.
animosity, because the eastern part of the state was big landowners and the western part was small landowners. And the way power was divided up, the big landowners had the power,
Yes,
and
and they were
we
minority.
always were felt, this side of the state
That's very true.
it was always put down.
Yeah, but way back to the 1700s, they figured if we become like-minded with our values intact from England and the same Anglican, and we work together, we can govern a whole bunch of people bigger than us if we're organized, and that's what happened for years. Then they lost when the Anglican Church was blown up. That's when they lost. But you're right, it's a whole evolution. And didn't you like what Bishop said? It played on a sentimentality that was already there. You know, use another romanticism that was already there. I mean, the books.
So did they feel like they were sort of, had become a different class of people? They were no longer among the elite Southerners, now they were
Well, you know what,
on something?
they feel like they still feel like they're
Yeah.
Southerners. I mean, the Dandridges, my goodness, the Dandridges and Walter, and they're good people, you know, but it's, I like what John Mosby said to somebody, it's my inheritance. West Virginia is not their inheritance. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, let's put it this way, John Unger, he was our state senator, he's a minister now. He told me the story how he went to talk to some people in a little church in West Virginia. And then they took out the snakes. And they were gonna show how they were gonna use the snake and, you know, they wanted him to handle the snakes. You know, because they'll heal you. And John told me he went to the restroom. And he climbed out the window and drove home. See, that's not Virginia. Is that it? Where are we on the clock?
4:20.
Good. Next week, do you see the progression? This whole thing about the royalists and all that whole pattern is kind of dies with that becoming West Virginia, just lingers. In the last 20 years of the 1800s, it was like King Amfortas in a sleep, never waking. The whole run shop, the whole nothing, everyone was impoverished. And it wasn't until the 1880s that you saw a school, you saw a church, the Black community found lots of little communities. But it was just, nothing moved. It was just, and you know what? The population didn't change. It was always between 15 and 18,000 for the whole county from 1870 to 1960. Can you imagine? Talk about it, you know, so John P. Bishop called this a severe regionalism. But that's how ideas stay. Now Shepherdstown, we just, everybody who came yesterday can do anything they want.
How big was the colony of Virginia when it was first established? All that expanded, didn't it?
In the very, very earliest days is probably, there's just, like in 1720 or 25, the number of blacks were just 91,000, is way low. All the settlement was not very much until these events around Charles I, and then you have this massive migration and a big offer. And then that's when, my goodness, at one point, Virginia had 240,000 enslaved people, triple any other state. That was the result of all these decisions they made.
But the colony to begin with was, the colony of Virginia was huge.
Right.
I mean, you know,
Went up to the
that's
Great Lakes.
5-some million acres, yeah, it was huge.
And all those soldiers, don't forget, they knew they could get land grants if they served. That was driving the whole thing a lot. That whole land west was all Ohio, Kentucky was all ready. or Kentucky. Da. We're done. Let's see what I got.
Thank
Now you can blow your nose. Did that go down well for you?
Very good.
I like, you know what,